The plasma cannons had finally stopped firing. Commander Marcus Chun pulled himself from the wreckage of his fighter, blood trickling down his forehead as emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the destroyed hangar bay. The USS Defiant, humanity's most advanced battleship, groaned around him as its hull plates buckled under the strain of catastrophic damage. Through the gaping hole in the ship's side, he could see the massive alien vessel that had brought about their defeat. The Zephyr Empire had found them at last. After 3 years of hiding in the Outer Rim territories, building their strength and gathering allies, the human resistance had been cornered. Marcus had known this day would come, but he hadn't expected it to end like this. His entire squadron was gone, vaporized in the opening minutes of what could barely be called a battle. The aliens' technology was simply too advanced, their tactics too refined. As he stumbled through the corridors filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning circuits, Marcus encountered other survivors. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the ship's chief medical officer, was treating wounded crew members in what remained of the medical bay. Her usually pristine uniform was torn and stained with blood, both human and alien, but her hands remained steady as she worked. "Marcus," she called out when she saw him. "Thank God you're alive. We've got wounded everywhere, and our medical supplies are running low." Before Marcus could respond, the ship shuddered violently as something massive docked with their vessel. The lights flickered once more before emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in a dim red glow. Through the ship's internal communication system, an alien voice spoke in perfect English, though the accent was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard. "Humans of the vessel Defiant, you will surrender immediately. Any resistance will result in immediate execution. You have 30 seconds to comply." Marcus grabbed the nearest comm unit. "This is Commander Chun of the Earth Defense Force. We demand to speak with your commanding officer under the laws of war." A sound that might have been laughter echoed through the speakers. "Laws of war? How quaint. You will address Queen Lyralii of the Zephyrian Royal House when she boards your vessel. You will show proper respect, or you'll die. That is the only law that matters here." The docking procedure completed with a series of metallic clangs that reverberated through the ship's superstructure. Marcus quickly gathered what remained of his crew, perhaps 24 survivors from a complement of 300. They stood in the main cargo bay, which had suffered the least damage, waiting for their captors to arrive. The airlock cycled, and Marcus got his first look at their conquerors. The Zephyrians were tall, easily 7 feet in height, with elongated limbs and pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light. Their features were sharp and angular, almost crystalline in their beauty, and their eyes glowed with an inner light that spoke of advanced genetic modification or perhaps something even more alien. But it was the figure that entered last that commanded everyone's attention. Queen Lyralii was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Her skin held a deeper blue hue, almost sapphire, and intricate silver markings covered her arms and face in patterns that seemed to shift when she moved. She wore armor that looked more like art than protection, all flowing curves and impossible angles that somehow managed to be both elegant and menacing. Her hair was white as starlight and moved as if underwater, defying the artificial gravity of the human ship. Behind her walked what could only be her personal guard, each one armed with weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. But what caught Marcus's attention was the small figure that the queen held protectively against her side. It was a child, clearly Zephyrian, but something was wrong. The little one's skin was pale, almost gray, and it trembled continuously despite being wrapped in what appeared to be some kind of thermal blanket. The child's breathing was labored, and even from a distance, Marcus could see that it was seriously ill. Queen Lyralii's glowing eyes swept across the assembled humans, and when her gaze fell upon Marcus, he felt as though she was looking directly into his soul. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of absolute power, but underneath it, Marcus detected something else. Desperation. "I am Queen Lyralii, 8th of her name, sovereign of the Zephyrian Empire and commander of the Stellar Fleet. You are my prisoners, and your lives are forfeit by the laws of conquest." She paused, and the child in her arms whimpered softly. The sound seemed to cause the queen physical pain. "However, I have need of your particular skills." Dr. Martinez stepped forward despite Marcus's restraining gesture. "Your child is sick," she said simply. The queen's expression didn't change, but the silver markings on her skin pulsed brighter. The heir to the Zephyrian throne suffers from a genetic malformation that our medical science cannot cure. Our physicians believe it is a result of environmental damage caused by your species' weapons during the early days of the war. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The early days of the war had been desperate times. Earth's military had used experimental bioweapons, thinking they might level the playing field against the technologically superior aliens. The weapons had proven ineffective against adult Zephyrians, but if they had caused genetic damage that was being passed to their children. "We have studied your species extensively," the queen continued, her voice taking on a deadly edge. "Your medical knowledge, while primitive, has shown remarkable adaptability. Your doctors have successfully treated conditions that our most advanced physicians declared hopeless. And, more importantly, you have something we lack." "Which is?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Compassion," the queen said, and the words seemed to taste strange in her mouth. "Your species treats the sick regardless of their origin, regardless of whether they are friend or enemy. This is a concept foreign to Zephyrian society, but our scholars believe it is precisely this quality that makes your medical techniques effective where ours fail." Dr. Martinez took another step forward. "I'll need to examine the child. My equipment is limited, but I might be able to help." The queen's guards immediately moved to intercept her, their weapons powering up with an ominous whine. But Lyrelii raised her hand, and they stopped. "You would help the child of your enemy?" the queen asked, her voice filled with what might have been wonder. "I'm a doctor," Sarah said simply. "That's what I do." For a long moment, the queen studied the human physician. Then, slowly, she approached and held out her child. The little Zephyrian was even more clearly ill up close. Its breathing was shallow and rapid. Its skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of systemic organ failure, and its eyes, though they glowed like its mother's, were dim and unfocused. Sarah gently took the child, and Marcus was amazed to see that the queen allowed it. The little alien was surprisingly light, and Sarah immediately began a preliminary examination with a medical scanner she carried on her belt. "The neural pathways are deteriorating," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "The brain is essentially eating itself, but the pattern is artificial, not natural. This was definitely caused by some kind of toxin or pathogen." She looked up at the queen. "How long has your child been like this?" "3 cycles," Lyrelii replied, and something in her voice cracked slightly. "Our physicians say death is inevitable. They estimate perhaps 1 more cycle before complete neural collapse." Sarah nodded grimly. "In human terms, that's about 6 months of symptoms, maybe 2 weeks to live. The good news is that the damage pattern suggests it might be reversible if we can identify and counteract the original cause. The bad news is that I'll need access to advanced medical equipment and full genetic scans to have any hope of success." "Name your price," the queen said immediately. Sarah glanced at Marcus, who understood the unspoken question. This could be their chance, not just to save lives, but to end the war. He nodded slightly. "We want safe passage for our survivors and a guarantee that no more human colonies will be attacked while we work on this," Marcus said. The queen's expression hardened. "You are in no position to make demands, human." "Neither are you," Marcus replied calmly. "You need us more than we need you. If your child dies, you lose the heir to your empire. If we die, you lose your only hope of saving them. That makes us equals, at least temporarily." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat and the labored breathing of the Zephyrian child in Sarah's arms. The queen's guards looked ready to disintegrate him on the spot, but Lyralii herself seemed to be weighing his words. Finally, she spoke. You will come to my flagship. Your medical officer will work to save my child, and you will serve as liaison. If the heir lives, your people will be granted safe passage. If my child dies, she didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was clear enough. What about the others? Marcus asked, gesturing to his surviving crew. They will remain here as insurance of your cooperation. My guards will see that they are fed and their wounded are treated, but they will not leave this ship until my child is healed. It wasn't a perfect deal, but it was better than immediate execution. Marcus nodded his acceptance. There's one more condition, the Queen said, and her voice took on a strange, almost ritualistic tone. Among my people, when a healer tends to a royal child, they become bound to that child's family by ancient law. If your physician succeeds in saving my heir, she will be elevated to the status of royal consort and will remain with us permanently. Sarah's eyes widened. Permanently? As in forever? As in, until death, the Queen confirmed. It is the highest honor that could be bestowed upon a non-Zephyrian. You would want for nothing, and your knowledge would be preserved and honored for all time. And if I refuse? Sarah asked. Then my child dies, and you all die with them. But the law is clear. If you accept this responsibility and succeed, you become family. There is no going back. Marcus saw Sarah's hands tighten protectively around the sick child. Even knowing what it would cost her, he could see the determination building in her eyes. This was who she was, who she had always been. She couldn't turn away from a patient, especially a child, no matter what the consequences. I accept, Sarah said quietly. The Queen nodded solemnly. Then, by the ancient laws of my people, you are bound to the royal house of Zephyria. May the stars witness this oath. As they prepared to transfer to the Zephyrian flagship, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what they had gotten themselves into. Sarah was committed now, bound by alien law to a species they had been at war with for years. But as he watched her gently caring for the sick child, adjusting the thermal blanket and murmuring soothing words that transcended language barriers, he began to understand something important. Maybe the Queen had been right about human compassion. Maybe it was exactly what was needed to bridge the gap between their species. And maybe, just maybe, this unexpected turn of events would lead to something neither side had dared to hope for. Peace. But first they had to save a child's life. And time was running out. The Zephyrian flagship was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The corridors weren't built with right angles, but flowed like organic tunnels, their walls seeming to pulse with a gentle bioluminescent glow. The air itself felt different here, thicker somehow, with a faint electrical charge that made the hair on his arm stand up. As they were escorted deeper into the massive vessel, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were inside some vast living creature rather than a constructed ship. Queen Lyralii led them personally through the winding passages, her child still cradled in Sarah's arms. The little Zephyrian had stopped trembling quite so violently since Sarah had begun treating them, though Marcus suspected this was more due to the human doctor's naturally calming presence than any medical intervention. Sarah had always had that effect on patients, an ability to radiate confidence and care that made people believe everything would be all right even in the darkest circumstances. They passed other Zephyrians in the corridors, and Marcus was struck by the diversity among them. While they shared the basic physical characteristics he had observed earlier, there were clear variations in height, coloring, and the intricate patterns that marked their skin. Some were tall and willowy like the Queen, while others were more compact and muscular. Their skin tones ranged from the palest blue-white to deep sapphire, and a few even showed hints of purple or silver. What struck him most was how they all reacted to seeing their Queen carrying a human. Their glowing eyes would widen in surprise, and many would press themselves against the corridor walls in what was clearly a gesture of deep respect. But Marcus also noticed the way their gazes lingered on the sick child in Sarah's arms, and he could see genuine concern in their expressions. Whatever else could be said about the Zephyrians, They clearly cared deeply for their royal family. The medical facility they eventually reached was breathtaking. The room was enormous, easily the size of an aircraft hangar, with a domed ceiling that showed a perfect holographic display of the local star system. Medical equipment that looked more like art installations and functional devices were arranged throughout the space, their surfaces covered in the same flowing organic curves that characterized the rest of the ship. Everything seemed to hum with barely contained energy, and the air itself seemed to sparkle with microscopic particles that Marcus assumed were some kind of advanced nanomedicine. "This is our primary medical facility," Queen Lyralii explained as they entered. "Our physicians have access to the most advanced medical technology in the known galaxy. Yet none of their knowledge has been able to help my child." A group of Zephyrian medical personnel approached them, and Marcus was surprised to see that their body language suggested nervousness, even fear. The lead physician, distinguished by more elaborate silver markings and what appeared to be some kind of high-tech headband, bowed deeply to the queen before speaking in their native language. The words sounded like music mixed with the crackling of electricity, beautiful but utterly alien. "Dr. Vextheri informs me that they have prepared a complete medical workstation for your colleague," the queen translated, though Marcus noticed she had paused before settling on the word colleague. "All of our scans and treatment attempts have been compiled for your review." Sarah nodded, though her attention was focused on the child rather than the impressive medical facility around them. "I'll need to start with a complete examination using both our technologies. Sometimes the combination of different approaches can reveal things that individual methods miss." "You have access to anything you require," the queen said. "Dr. Vextheri will assist you in any way possible." As Sarah was led to the prepared workstation, Marcus found himself standing awkwardly beside the queen. He was acutely aware that he was probably the first human to ever set foot in this place, possibly the first human to see any of this technology. The weight of that responsibility, combined with the gravity of their situation, was almost overwhelming. "Your physician," the queen said suddenly, her voice quiet enough that only Marcus could hear. "She is remarkable. Sarah is one of the best doctors in human space," Marcus replied, watching as his friend began her examination of the royal child. "But more than that, she genuinely cares about every patient she treats. I've seen her work 18-hour days to save the life of someone she's never met before. This concept of caring for strangers is difficult for my people to understand," Queen Lyralii admitted. "In Zephyrian society, loyalty and obligation flow along clearly defined lines. Family, house, empire. We do not typically extend ourselves for those outside these structures." "Then, how do your doctors work?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "They fulfill their duties as required by law and custom. They are skilled, efficient, and effective, but they do not invest themselves emotionally in their patients' outcomes the way your Dr. Martinez appears to." As if to illustrate the queen's point, Sarah was at that moment singing softly to the Zephyrian child as she ran her medical scanner over their small form. It was an old Earth lullaby that Marcus remembered from his own childhood, something his grandmother used to sing. The child's glowing eyes were focused intently on Sarah's face, and their breathing had become noticeably more regular. "Your music," the queen said, and there was wonder in her voice. "The child responds to it. Music is universal," Marcus said. "It doesn't matter what species you are, rhythm and melody seem to speak to something fundamental in all living things." The preliminary examination took almost an hour, with Sarah using both human and Zephyrian medical equipment to build a complete picture of the child's condition. Marcus watched the interplay between Sarah and Dr. Vextheri with fascination. Despite the language barrier and completely different medical traditions, the two physicians quickly developed a working partnership based on their shared dedication to healing. When Sarah finally looked up from her work, her expression was grave, but not hopeless. "The damage is extensive," she announced to the assembled group. "The neural pathways in the brain are deteriorating at an accelerating rate, and several major organ systems are beginning to fail. But I think I understand what's happening. She activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional image of the child's brain. Even to Marcus's untrained eye, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. Entire sections that should have been glowing with neural activity were dark or flickering weakly. This isn't just genetic damage, Sarah continued. It's an active infection. There's some kind of synthetic pathogen that's been engineered to target Zephyrian neural tissue, specifically. It's been dormant in the child's system since birth, but something triggered its activation about 6 months ago. The Queen's skin markings flared brightly. Impossible. Our physicians would have detected any infection. Not this one, Sarah said, manipulating the holographic display to show microscopic details. It's been designed to mimic natural Zephyrian cellular structures. Your immune system can't recognize it as foreign because it looks exactly like it belongs there. It's only revealed when you compare its genetic structure to baseline human patterns. Dr. Vexthery said something in rapid Zephyrian, their headband device flickering with increased activity. Queen Lyralii translated automatically. Dr. Vexthery asks how human medical knowledge could reveal something that Zephyrian science cannot detect. Sarah smiled grimly. Because we're the ones who made it. This pathogen is based on human bioweapon technology from the early days of the war. Someone took our research and modified it to target your species' children specifically. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt his blood run cold as the implications sank in. If what Sarah was saying was true, then this wasn't just a medical crisis. It was an act of biological warfare targeting the most vulnerable members of Zephyrian society. You are saying that humans created the disease that is killing my child. The Queen's voice was deadly quiet, and Marcus could see her guards tensing, their weapons beginning to power up. Not exactly, Sarah said quickly, stepping protectively in front of the child. The base pathogen is human-designed, yes, but the modifications that make it target Zephyrian children, specifically, those require detailed knowledge of your species' genetics and biology. This was created by someone with access to both human and Zephyrian medical data. A collaboration, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. Someone from both sides working together. Queen Lyralii's expression was thunderous. Impossible. No Zephyrian would participate in such an abomination. With respect, Your Majesty, Sarah interjected, the evidence is right here in your child's bloodstream. This pathogen exists, which means someone created it. And they created it specifically to cause maximum emotional trauma by targeting children rather than military personnel. The Queen was silent for a long moment, her glowing eyes fixed on her sick child. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of terrible understanding. The purest faction, she said quietly. There is a group within my court that believes any contact with alien species weakens the Zephyrian genetic line. They have argued for complete extermination rather than conquest and integration, and they would be willing to sacrifice Zephyrian children to prove their point. Marcus asked, horrified. They believe that children affected by alien contamination are better off dead than allowed to pollute the royal bloodline, the Queen said, and Marcus could hear the pain in her voice. I had dismissed their rhetoric as extremist nonsense. I never imagined they would act on it. Sarah had returned her attention to the child, who was becoming increasingly restless. The pathogen is entering a new phase. We need to begin treatment immediately, or we're going to lose them. What do you need? Queen Lyralii asked. Mostly. The treatment is going to be complex and dangerous. I'll need to use a combination of human antiviral drugs and Zephyrian neural regeneration technology. But more than that, I'm going to need the child to want to live. This pathogen feeds on stress and despair. The more frightened or unhappy the child becomes, the faster it spreads. What are you suggesting? Constant care. Someone needs to be with your child every moment, keeping them calm, comfortable, and loved. The treatment will take at least 72 hours, and during that time, the child cannot be left alone for even a moment. The Queen nodded immediately. I will remain here. With respect, Your Majesty, I don't think that's going to be enough, Sarah said gently. The child is already bonding with me because I represent something new and non-threatening. They need continuity of care, and they need to feel safe. You're their mother, but you're also clearly terrified for their life. Children pick up on that fear. Then what do you propose? Sarah looked at Marcus, and he saw the determination in her eyes that he recognized from a dozen emergency situations. She was about to do something that would change everything. I need to stay with the child for the entire treatment period. Not just as a doctor, but as a caregiver. I need to become someone they trust completely. Someone who can keep them calm when the treatment becomes painful or frightening. You would do this? The Queen asked. Remain here for 3 days, tending to a child of your enemy? They're not my enemy, Sarah said simply, gently stroking the child's head. They're a patient. They're a baby who's sick and scared and needs help. That's all that matters. Marcus watched as something fundamental shifted in Queen Lyraliai's expression. The cold, regal mask she wore seemed to crack slightly, revealing genuine emotion beneath. Dr. Martinez, she said formally, by the laws of my people, you have already accepted the responsibility of royal healer. If you choose to provide this level of care for my child, you will be bound to our house, not just by law, but by the deepest bonds of family. Do you understand what this means? I understand that a child needs help, Sarah replied. Everything else we can figure out later. The Queen nodded slowly, then did something that surprised everyone in the room. She knelt beside Sarah and placed her own hand over the human doctor's as it rested on the child's forehead. Then, let us begin, she said, and may the stars grant us success. As the first phase of treatment began, Marcus found himself thinking about the strange turns their lives had taken. Hours ago, they had been enemies in the depths of space. Now, they were partners in the most important mission any of them had ever undertaken. The war between their species had started with fear and misunderstanding. Maybe, Marcus thought as he watched Sarah work to save an alien child, it would end with love and hope. But first, they had to make it through the next 3 days. The first night was the hardest. Sarah had warned them that the treatment would cause the child's condition to worsen before it improved, as the antiviral agents fought to destroy the synthetic pathogen while simultaneously trying to repair the damage it had caused. What she hadn't anticipated was just how much the little Zephyrian would suffer. The child, whom Marcus had learned was named Kiara, developed a fever that made their skin burn to the touch. Their small body convulsed with seizures that the Zephyrian medical equipment could barely control, and their breathing became so labored that Sarah had to use a human ventilator to keep them alive. Through it all, the little one's eyes remained fixed on Sarah's face, as if she were the only anchor keeping them connected to the world of the living. Sarah never left the child's side. She held Kiara through the worst of the seizures, sang every lullaby she could remember when the pain medication wasn't enough, and monitored vital signs with a dedication that bordered on obsessive. Marcus brought her food that she barely touched, and water that she drank without looking away from her patient. Queen Lyraliai was a constant presence as well, though she maintained a respectful distance from the treatment area. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on her face as she watched her child suffer. Every parent's instinct told her to intervene, to hold her baby and comfort them, but she understood that Sarah's treatment required continuity of care. The human doctor had become Kiara's primary caregiver, and any disruption to that bond could be catastrophic. Your species, the Queen said to Marcus during one of their quiet conversations, you form attachments very quickly. It's one of our strengths, Marcus replied, watching Sarah gently adjust Kiara's position to ease their breathing. But also one of our weaknesses. We get emotionally invested in outcomes, sometimes to our own detriment. Dr. Martinez has known my child for less than 1 day, yet she cares for them as if they were her own offspring. That's just who Sarah is. She's been like that since medical school. I remember one time, she spent 3 weeks sleeping in a hospital waiting room because she was worried about a patient who had no family to visit them. The Queen was quiet for a moment, studying Sarah's gentle ministrations. Among my people, such attachment would be seen as a weakness. We are taught to maintain emotional distance to preserve our objectivity. Maybe that's why your doctors couldn't save Kiara, Marcus said carefully. Sometimes healing requires more than just medical knowledge. Sometimes it requires love. As if to prove his point, Kiara began to whimper, a sound that was heartbreaking in its frailty. Sarah immediately began humming a soft melody while gently stroking the child's forehead. The whimpering gradually subsided, and Kiara's breathing steadied once more. "Your Dr. Martinez," the Queen said, and her voice carried a note of wonder. "She truly loves my child. She loves all her patients," Marcus said. "But, yes, I think Kiara has touched something special in her heart. Sarah always wanted children of her own, but her career in military medicine never left time for a family." The second day brought new challenges. The pathogen, sensing its own destruction, began to release toxins as a final attack against its host. Kiara's kidneys started to fail, their neural activity dropped to dangerous levels, and their immune system went into overdrive, attacking their own healthy tissue. Sarah worked with Dr. Vexthery to modify the treatment protocol in real time, adapting human medical techniques to work with Zephyrian physiology. It was during this crisis that Marcus witnessed something remarkable. Other members of the royal household began to arrive in the medical facility, not to interfere, but simply to be present. They came quietly, respectfully, and arranged themselves around the treatment area in what Marcus gradually realized was a traditional Zephyrian vigil. Nobles, servants, guards, and medical staff all joined together in silent support for their royal heir. "This is unprecedented," Queen Lyralii murmured to Marcus. "The court has never shown such unity around a single cause." "They love Kiara too," Marcus observed. "Royal or not, they're all invested in this child's survival." "It is more than that," the Queen said, her glowing eyes fixed on Sarah as she worked. "They're witnessing something they have never seen before. They are watching a member of an enemy species sacrifice herself for one of ours. It is challenging their understanding of the universe." As the day progressed, Marcus began to notice subtle changes in how the Zephyrians interacted with him. Where before they had maintained careful distance, now some of them approached him with questions about human culture, human medicine, and human philosophy. They wanted to understand how a species they had been taught to view as inferior could produce someone like Sarah Martinez. One of the younger courtiers, a Zephyrian named Veldar whose silver markings indicated them as a member of the scholarly class, was particularly interested in human concepts of compassion and altruism. "Your people help others even when it provides no benefit to yourselves?" Veldar asked, their musical voice filled with genuine curiosity. "Often, yes," Marcus replied. "We call it empathy, the ability to feel what others feel, to suffer when they suffer. But this would make you vulnerable to manipulation. How do you survive as a species if you constantly sacrifice yourselves for others?" "We don't always sacrifice ourselves," Marcus explained. "But when we do, it's usually because we believe that helping others ultimately helps everyone. Sarah isn't just saving Kiara because she cares about one child. She's trying to prevent a war that would kill millions on both sides." Veldar's head tilted in a gesture that Marcus was beginning to recognize as the Zephyrian equivalent of a nod. This suggests a very different understanding of self-interest than we were taught. By the third day, the crisis had passed. The pathogen was dying, destroyed by the combination of human antivirals and Zephyrian immune boosters that Sarah and Dr. Vexthery had developed together. Kiara's fever broke just after dawn, and their breathing became strong and regular for the first time since treatment began. Most importantly, the child's neural activity had not only stabilized, but was actually showing signs of regeneration. Sarah finally allowed herself to sleep, curled up in a chair beside Kiara's treatment bed with one hand resting on the child's arm. She had been awake for 72 hours straight, sustained only by medical stimulants and sheer willpower. As she slept, Kiara turned toward her, their small hand closing around Sarah's fingers in an unmistakably affectionate gesture. The child has bonded with her completely, Queen Lyralii observed, and there was no mistaking the emotion in her voice. In our culture, such bonds are considered sacred. What happens now? Marcus asked. Sarah fulfilled her part of the bargain. Kiera is going to live. Yes, the Queen said slowly. Dr. Martinez has indeed fulfilled her obligation. By the laws of my people, she is now a member of the royal family, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. And if she chooses to return to human space instead, the Queen's expression hardened slightly. She cannot. The bonds of royal healership are not subject to personal choice. She has saved the heir to the throne. By law and custom, she belongs to us now. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. That sounds suspiciously like slavery. It is not slavery, the Queen said sharply. It is honor. Dr. Martinez will want for nothing. She will have access to the finest luxuries our civilization can provide, the best education, the most advanced medical facilities in the galaxy. She will be consulted on all matters of health and healing, and her word will carry the weight of royal decree. But she can never leave. She would not want to, the Queen said, though something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely certain. Why would she choose to return to a life of hardship and conflict when she could remain here, honored and cherished? Before Marcus could respond, Sarah stirred in her chair. Kiera had awakened and was making soft cooing sounds, reaching up towards Sarah's face with tiny hands. Sarah smiled, and Marcus was struck by how natural she looked in this role, how right it seemed for her to be caring for this alien child. Good morning, little one, Sarah murmured, gently lifting Kiera into her arms. How are you feeling? As if in response, Kiera began to make a sound that was unmistakably laughter. Their eyes were bright and alert, and their skin had regained its healthy blue coloration. The transformation was remarkable. 3 days ago, this child had been dying. Now, they were clearly on the path to full recovery. Dr. Vextheri approached with her medical scanner, running a complete diagnostic on the young royal. When they finished, they spoke rapidly to Queen Lyralii in their native language. The Queen's skin markings flared brightly with what Marcus now recognized as intense joy. Dr. Vextheri reports that the pathogen has been completely eliminated, the Queen announced to the gathered court. All neural damage is regenerating normally, and all organ functions have returned to baseline. The heir to the throne has been saved. A cheer went up from the assembled Zephyrians, a sound like wind chimes mixed with distant thunder. Many of them pressed forward to get a better look at the healthy child in Sarah's arms, and Marcus was amazed to see genuine tears in some of their glowing eyes. But it was Queen Lyralii's reaction that surprised him most. The regal mask she had worn throughout the crisis finally crumbled completely, and she wept openly as she approached Sarah and her child. Dr. Martinez, she said, her voice thick with emotion, you have given me back my world. How can I ever repay such a gift? Sarah looked up at her, Kiera still giggling in her arms, and Marcus could see the conflict in her eyes. She had grown to love this child deeply, but she also understood what accepting the Queen's gratitude would mean. Your Majesty, Sarah said carefully, I need to know something. If I choose to stay and accept my role as royal consort, what happens to the war between our peoples? The war. The Queen seemed surprised by the question. Dr. Martinez, you had just proven that cooperation between our species is not only possible, but beneficial. After what I have witnessed here, how could I continue to wage war against your people? And the purest faction? The ones who created the pathogen in the first place. The Queen's expression darkened. They will be dealt with. Any Zephyrian who would poison children to advance their political agenda is a traitor to the crown and will be punished accordingly. Sarah nodded slowly, then looked at Marcus. What about my people? My friends? They will be honored as heroes, Queen Lyralii said immediately. Commander Chun and his crew will be given safe passage to any destination they choose, with full diplomatic immunity. Moreover, I will open formal negotiations with your Earth government to establish a lasting peace treaty. It was more than they had dared to hope for, but Marcus could see that Sarah was still struggling with the decision. She had fallen in love with Kara, that much was obvious, but she was also being asked to give up everything she had ever known for a life among aliens who, despite their current gratitude, had been her enemies just days before. "I need time to think," Sarah said finally. "Of course," the Queen replied graciously, "though I hope you will not take too long. Kara has already begun to ask for you when you are not present." As if summoned by the mention of their name, Kara looked up at Sarah and babbled something in their musical language. Sarah laughed and responded with gentle nonsense, sounds that seemed to delight the child. Watching them together, Marcus realized that the decision had already been made, whether Sarah acknowledged it or not. The bond between doctor and patient had become something deeper, something that transcended species and politics and the ancient hostilities that had brought them all to this moment. The war was ending, not through conquest or surrender, but through love. And Sarah Martinez, military physician turned royal consort, would be the bridge between two civilizations learning to trust each other after years of conflict. It wasn't the ending any of them had expected, but as Marcus watched Sarah gently rock Kara to sleep, he couldn't imagine any other outcome feeling quite so right. The ceremonial chambers of the Zephyrian flagship were unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. The walls seemed to be made of living crystal, pulsing with soft, bioluminescent patterns that shifted in response to the emotions of those present. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, creating the illusion of standing in a vast cathedral made of starlight and dreams. As Sarah prepared for the formal bonding ceremony that would make her a permanent member of the Zephyrian royal family, Marcus couldn't help but feel he was witnessing history in the making. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Sarah for what felt like the 100th time as she was fitted with ceremonial robes by a team of Zephyrian attendants. The garments were beautiful, but alien, flowing like liquid mercury and seeming to emit their own subtle glow. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Sarah replied, though Marcus could hear the nervous excitement in her voice. In her arms, young Kara babbled happily, completely recovered from their brush with death, and clearly fascinated by all the ceremonial preparations happening around them. The past week had been a whirlwind of activity. True to her word, Queen Lyralii had immediately opened negotiations with Earth's government, using Marcus as an intermediary. The initial talks had been tense, with Earth's military leadership skeptical of Zephyrian intentions, and the Zephyrian court divided over the wisdom of allying with a species they had considered inferior. But as word spread of how a human physician had saved the royal heir, public opinion on both sides began to shift dramatically. The breakthrough had come when Sarah proposed a cultural exchange program. Rather than jumping immediately into military and political alliances, she suggested starting with medical and scientific cooperation. Human physicians would train with Zephyrian doctors to learn their advanced healing techniques, while Zephyrian medics would study human approaches to compassionate care and trauma medicine. Your people's emotional investment in patient outcomes actually improves treatment effectiveness, Dr. Vextheri had explained to the assembled diplomats through a translator. "We have analyzed Dr. Martinez's treatment protocols and discovered that the psychological comfort she provided was as important as the medication she administered. This challenges fundamental assumptions about medical practice." The cultural exchange program had expanded rapidly from there. Zephyrian scientists were fascinated by human creativity and adaptability, while human researchers were eager to study Zephyrian biotechnology and energy manipulation techniques. Within days, preliminary agreements were in place for shared research stations, student exchange programs, and joint exploration missions. But it was the personal relationships forming between individuals from both species that really captured public imagination. Veldar, the young Zephyrian scholar who had befriended Marcus, had requested permission to accompany him back to human space to study at Earth's universities. Several human crew members from the Defiant had asked to remain aboard the Zephyrian flagship to learn about alien technology and culture, Most remarkably, Dr. Vexthery and Sarah had begun collaborating on a comprehensive medical textbook that would combine the best of both species' healing knowledge. Now, as preparations for Sarah's formal bonding ceremony neared completion, Marcus reflected on how much their world had changed in just 1 week. The war that had consumed both civilizations for years was effectively over, ended not by military victory, but by the simple act of one woman choosing to care for a sick child. The ceremony will begin soon, Queen Lyralii announced as she entered the preparation chamber. She wore her own ceremonial robes, even more elaborate than Sarah's, with flowing panels that seemed to contain entire galaxies within their depths. "Are you prepared, Dr. Martinez?" "As prepared as anyone can be for something like this," Sarah said with a nervous laugh. "Though I have to admit, I'm still not entirely sure what I'm agreeing to." "You are becoming family," the Queen said simply. "By Zephyrian law, you will be elevated to the status of royal consort, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. You will have a voice in matters of state, particularly those relating to health, medicine, and interspecies relations. Your word will carry the weight of royal decree, and you will be consulted on all decisions affecting the welfare of the royal family." "And what about Kiera?" Sarah asked, gently bouncing the child in her arms. "Kiera will remain your primary responsibility," the Queen replied. "You have become their chosen caregiver, their emotional anchor. In our culture, such bonds are considered unbreakable. You will guide their education, oversee their health, and help prepare them for their eventual role as ruler of our empire." Marcus watched Sarah absorb this information. She was essentially being asked to become a step-parent to the future ruler of a galactic civilization. It was an enormous responsibility, but as he watched her interact with Kiera, he couldn't think of anyone better suited for the role. "There's something else you should know," Queen Lyralii continued, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "The bonding ceremony we are about to perform, it is not merely legal or political. Among my people, it involves a sharing of consciousness, a literal joining of minds and spirits. You will experience my memories, my emotions, my understanding of what it means to be Zephyrian, and I will experience yours." Sarah's eyes widened. "A telepathic bond? More than that. We will become family in the truest sense, connected at a fundamental level. Our thoughts and feelings will be partially shared for the rest of our lives. It is intimate in a way that your language does not have words to describe." Marcus felt a chill of concern. Is this reversible? If Sarah changes her mind? "The bond, once formed, cannot be broken," the Queen said firmly. "This is why I am explaining it now, before we proceed. Dr. Martinez must understand exactly what she is choosing." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, gently stroking Kiera's head as she considered the implications. Finally, she looked up at the Queen with determination in her eyes. "Will this help me understand Kiera better? Help me be a better caregiver for them?" "Yes," Queen Lyralii replied. "You will understand our child as no outsider ever has. You will know their needs, their fears, their dreams as if they were your own." "Then, I accept," Sarah said without hesitation. "Kiera is my patient, and soon they'll be my child too. I want to understand them completely." The ceremony itself was breathtaking and alien in equal measure. The entire royal court assembled in the crystal chamber, their bioluminescent markings creating patterns of light that seemed to dance in harmony with unheard music. Ancient words were spoken in the Zephyrian language, their meaning lost to Marcus, but their emotional weight unmistakable. When a moment of bonding arrived, Sarah and Queen Lyralii stood facing each other with Kiera between them. They placed their hands on each other's foreheads, and their skin markings began to glow with increasing intensity. Sarah, lacking natural bioluminescent markings, began to glow with a soft white radiance that seemed to emanate from within her very cells. Marcus watched in amazement as both women's expressions shifted and changed, their faces reflecting emotions and memories that clearly belonged to each other. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she experienced the Queen's terror, during Kara's illness, while Ireliai's face showed wonder as she felt Sarah's immediate and unconditional love for the child she had only just met. The bonding lasted only minutes, but when it was complete, both women were fundamentally changed. The formal distance that had existed between them was gone, replaced by an intimacy that spoke of shared understanding. They were no longer strangers from different worlds, but family members bound by bonds deeper than blood. "It is done," Queen Lyrelii announced to the assembled court, though her voice carried new warmth when she looked at Sarah. Dr. Sarah Martinez is now Sarah of House Lyrelii, royal consort and healer to the throne. Let all present bear witness. The celebration that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Music that seemed to come from the very walls of the ship filled the air, and foods from across the Zephyrian Empire appeared as if by magic. The mood was jubilant, with nobles and common crew members alike toasting the new alliance between their species and the remarkable human woman who had made it possible. But the most touching moment came when little Kara, who had been passed among various caregivers during the ceremony, began to fuss and cry. Without hesitation, the child reached for Sarah, babbling what Marcus realized were their first clear words in Zephyrian. "They're asking for their mama," Queen Lyrelii translated, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Kara is calling you mama." Sarah gathered the child into her arms, and Kara immediately calmed, snuggling against her with obvious contentment. The sight brought cheers from the assembled crowd, but Marcus could see that for Sarah, nothing else in the room existed except the small being who had just claimed her as family. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Marcus found himself in quiet conversation with his transformed friend. "Any regrets?" he asked. Sarah looked down at Kara, who had fallen asleep in her arms despite the noise and celebration surrounding them. "How could I regret this? A week ago, I was just another military doctor. Now I'm helping to shape the future of two civilizations. And more than that, I have a family." "What was it like?" "The bonding." "Incredible," Sarah said softly. "I can feel Lyreliai's presence in my mind, her memories of growing up in the royal court, her love for her people, her fear of failure as a ruler. And she understands me too now. She knows about my childhood on the frontier colonies, about losing my parents to the Regellian plague, about why I became a doctor." She paused, her expression becoming thoughtful. "But the most amazing part is what I learned about Kara. Through Lyreliai's memories, I experienced their birth, their first steps, their favorite games and songs. I know them as completely as if I had raised them myself. And you're okay with staying here permanently? Never returning to human space?" Sarah smiled. "Marcus, I'm going to be traveling back and forth between our worlds constantly as part of the cultural exchange program. I'll be establishing new medical schools, training programs, research facilities. I'm not losing my old life. I'm expanding it beyond anything I ever dreamed possible." As if to punctuate her words, Kara stirred in her arms and opened their bright eyes. The child looked up at Sarah with obvious adoration and babbled something in their musical language. "They want to know if you're going to tell them a bedtime story," Queen Lyrelii said, approaching with a smile. The formal barriers between the two women had completely dissolved, replaced by an easy familiarity that spoke of their new bond. "Of course," Sarah said, gently rocking Kara. "What kind of stories do Zephyrian children like?" "The same kind all children like," Lyrelii replied. "Stories about brave heroes, magical adventures, and happy endings." As Sarah began to tell Kara a traditional Earth fairy tale, translating it into simple Zephyrian phrases she had learned over the past week, Marcus realized he was witnessing the birth of something entirely new. Not just peace between their species, but a genuine fusion of cultures that would shape both civilizations for generations to come. The war was truly over, ended not by conquest or surrender, but by love, compassion, and the universal bond between a caregiver and child. And at the center of it all was his friend Sarah, who had chosen to follow her heart, and in doing so had changed the course of galactic history. Looking around at the celebration continuing in the crystal chamber, at the sight of humans and Zephyrians talking and laughing together as equals, Marcus couldn't help but smile. This was exactly the kind of ending that made all their struggles worthwhile. The future was bright, filled with infinite possibilities for both their peoples. And it had all started with a simple request: soothe my child and become my consort. Sarah had done both, and in the process, she had given the galaxy hope for a better tomorrow. 5 years had passed since the day Sarah Martinez saved a dying alien child and changed the course of galactic history. The universe was a very different place now, shaped by the alliance between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire that had grown from those desperate hours in a medical bay. What had begun as a hostage situation had evolved into the most successful interspecies partnership in recorded history. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the New Harmony Research Station, watching as the latest batch of exchange students arrived on transport ships from both Earth and Zephyria Prime. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, combining human adaptability with Zephyrian biotechnology to create something neither species could have built alone. It orbited the neutral world of Kepler 442b, which had been designated as the official headquarters for interspecies collaboration efforts. At her side, 8-year-old Kara pressed their face against the transparent aluminum viewport, watching the ships dock with obvious excitement. The child had grown tall and strong, their blue skin now marked with the distinctive silver patterns that indicated their royal heritage. But more than their physical development, it was their personality that had truly blossomed under Sarah's care. "Mama Sarah, will I get to meet the new human students?" Kara asked, their English now fluent, though still carrying the musical accent of their native language. "Of course, little star," Sarah replied, using the pet name that had evolved naturally over the years. "In fact, I was hoping you might help me show them around the station. You know better than anyone how to help newcomers feel welcome." Kara beamed with pride. Despite their royal status, or perhaps because of Sarah's influence, the child had developed a genuine love for helping others. They had become something of an unofficial ambassador, equally comfortable with human children who visited the station and Zephyrian youngsters from the noble houses. "Dr. Sarah?" came a familiar voice from behind them. Sarah turned to see Dr. Vextheri approaching, their silver markings flickering with the excitement that always accompanied their joint research projects. The latest test results from the hybrid medical techniques are remarkable. The recovery rates for trauma patients have improved by 47% when we combine human emotional support protocols with Zephyrian cellular regeneration technology. "That's wonderful news," Sarah said, though she wasn't surprised. The integration of human and Zephyrian medical practices have been one of her primary focuses since accepting her role as royal consort. "Have you prepared the data for presentation to the Galactic Health Council next week?" "Indeed. Commander Chun has also requested a briefing for the Joint Defense Committee. It appears our medical advances have military applications as well." Marcus had been promoted to admiral over the past 5 years, serving as the primary human liaison to the Zephyrian military. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth, with hardliners on both sides resisting the new alliance, but the practical benefits of cooperation had gradually won over most skeptics. Human creativity and adaptability complemented Zephyrian precision and technological superiority, creating military capabilities that neither species could have achieved alone. "Mama Sarah," Kara interrupted politely, "may I ask Dr. Vextheri about the new research project? The one about helping sick children?" "Of course, little star." Dr. Vextheri loves talking about their work. The Zephyrian physician knelt down to Kara's level, their expression softening in the way that always happened when they interacted with children. Over the years, Vextheri had absorbed much of Sarah's approach to patient care, developing an emotional investment in their work that had initially scandalized traditional Zephyrian medicine, but now served as a model for the next generation of healers. The project involves creating specialized treatment centers for children with rare genetic conditions, Vextheri explained patiently. We're combining the best techniques from both our species to help young ones who might not survive with traditional medicine alone. Like I was helped. Kiera asked seriously. Exactly like you were helped. Your recovery has become the foundation for everything we do. It was true. The techniques Sarah had developed to treat Kiera's synthetic pathogen infection had revolutionized pediatric medicine across both civilizations. What had started as a desperate improvisation had evolved into standardized protocols now taught in medical schools throughout human and Zephyrian space. Your Majesty, came another voice, this one carrying the formal tone of a court official. Sarah turned to see Minister Raltesh approaching, their elaborate ceremonial robes indicating this was an official visit rather than a social call. Queen Lyralii had established a tradition of rotating the royal court between various worlds and stations, believing that the monarchy should be visible and accessible to all citizens of the expanding empire. Currently, the court was in residence at New Harmony, which made Sarah's dual roles as researcher and royal consort much easier to manage. Minister, Sarah acknowledged, automatically shifting into the formal bearing that royal protocol required. Even after 5 years, she sometimes felt like she was playing a role, though the psychological bond with Lyralii had made the cultural transition much easier than it might otherwise have been. Her Royal Majesty requests your presence in the council chambers, Raltesh announced. The delegation from the Andromedan Coalition has arrived for the preliminary negotiations. Sarah nodded, having expected this summons. The Andromedan Coalition represented a group of species from a neighboring galaxy who had recently made contact with the Human-Zephyrian Alliance. Initial communications had been promising, but establishing formal diplomatic relations with an entirely different galactic civilization was incredibly complex work. Kiera, why don't you go with Dr. Vextheri to greet the new students, Sarah suggested. I'll join you for dinner after the diplomatic meetings are finished. Will you tell me about the Andromedans tonight? Kiera asked eagerly. The child had inherited their mother's intellectual curiosity along with what Sarah recognized as a very human fascination with exploration and discovery. If the meetings go well, I might have some interesting stories to share, Sarah promised, kissing Kiera's forehead before heading toward the council chambers. The diplomatic section of New Harmony was designed to accommodate a wide variety of species, with adjustable atmospheric controls, variable gravity zones, and furniture that could reconfigure itself for different physiologies. The Andromedan delegation was particularly exotic, even by the standards of interstellar diplomacy. The coalition representatives were silicon-based life forms who communicated through modulated electromagnetic fields rather than sound. They appeared as shifting crystalline sculptures that constantly change color and form, beautiful but utterly alien. Translation required specialized equipment that converted their EM communications into audible language and vice versa. Queen Lyralii was already in deep discussion with the lead Andromedan when Sarah entered the chamber. Through their shared bond, Sarah could feel her partner's mixture of excitement and apprehension about these new potential allies. The negotiations were critically important, not just for their own alliance, but for the stability of the entire galactic region. Ah, Sarah, Lyralii said as she approached. Perfect timing. Ambassador Crystalline Harmony in Motion was just explaining their species' approach to medical ethics. The Andromedan representative pulsed with colors that the translation system rendered as polite acknowledgement. The biological entities of your alliance demonstrate fascinating approaches to healing. We are particularly intrigued by reports of emotional bonding between caregiver and patient as a therapeutic tool. It's become one of our most effective treatment modalities, Sarah explained, settling into the diplomatic rhythm that had become second nature over the years. We found that patients who feel genuinely cared for recover faster and more completely than those who receive purely technical medical intervention. This concept of caring requires clarification. The ambassador responded, their crystalline form shifting through a spectrum of blues and purples. Our medical protocols focus on efficiency and Optimal resource allocation. Emotional investment seems inefficient. That's what we thought too, initially, interjected another voice. Sarah turned to see Dr. Vexthery entering the chamber, having apparently finished settling the new students. Our traditional medical practices emphasized clinical detachment. But 5 years of collaboration with human physicians has demonstrated that emotional engagement actually improves medical outcomes measurably. Sarah felt a surge of pride at hearing her Zephyrian colleague defend concepts that had once been foreign to their entire civilization. The cultural exchange had been truly bidirectional, with both species learning and growing from their partnership. The negotiations continued for several hours, covering everything from trade protocols to joint research initiatives. The Andromedans were particularly interested in the medical exchange programs that had become the foundation of human-Zephyrian cooperation. Their own civilization had recently encountered several new diseases as they expanded into previously unexplored regions of their galaxy, and they hoped to learn from the Alliance's approach to collaborative medicine. We propose a limited trial program, Ambassador Crystalline Harmony in Motion eventually suggested. A small number of our medical practitioners could observe your treatment methods, while your specialists could study our approach to cybernetic organic interfaces. It was a modest beginning, but Sarah recognized the potential for something much greater. The same pattern that had transformed the relationship between humans and Zephyrians could eventually create a multi-galactic network of cooperation and mutual support. By the time the formal negotiations concluded, local night had fallen across the station. Sarah made her way back to the royal residential quarters, eager to reconnect with her family after the intensity of diplomatic work. She found Kiera in their study, working on homework with typical royal dedication. "How did the meetings go, Mama Sarah?" the child asked, looking up from what appeared to be a complex mathematics problem. "Very well, little star. I think we're going to have some new friends from very far away. Will I get to meet them? Eventually, perhaps, though they're quite different from humans or Zephyrians. They're made of living crystal and communicate with light instead of sound." Kiera's eyes widened with fascination. "That sounds amazing. Do you think they have children like us?" "I don't know yet, but that's one of the many things we'll hopefully learn as we get to know them better." Queen Lyrelii arrived a few minutes later, and Sarah could feel through their bond the satisfaction of a successful diplomatic day. The three of them shared dinner together, as had become their family tradition, discussing the events of their respective days and planning for tomorrow's activities. The Andromedan Coalition has agreed to a formal cultural exchange program, Lyrelii announced. Small scale initially, but with potential for significant expansion if the preliminary programs prove successful. "That's wonderful news," Sarah said, though she was already thinking about the logistical challenges involved in accommodating silicon-based life forms and facilities designed for biological entities. "I've been thinking," Kara said suddenly, their voice taking on the thoughtful tone that usually preceded some insight that surprised the adults. "Maybe the reason our alliance with the humans worked so well is because we needed each other. You needed someone to heal me, and Mama Sarah needed someone to care for. Maybe the Andromedans need something too, and we can help provide it." Sarah and Lyrelii exchanged glances, both impressed by the child's perceptive analysis. At only 8 years old, Kiera was already demonstrating the wisdom and compassion that would serve them well as a future ruler. "That's very insightful, my child," Lyrelii said with obvious pride. "What do you think the Andromedans might need from us?" "Well," Kiera said seriously, "they seem very interested in how we care for sick people. Maybe their civilization is really good at fixing technical problems, but not very good at making people feel better. Maybe they're lonely." The simplicity of the observation was striking. In all their diplomatic analysis and strategic planning, neither Sarah nor Lyrelii had considered the possibility that the technologically advanced Andromedans might be seeking emotional fulfillment rather than practical benefits. "You know what, little star?" Sarah said, pulling Kiera into a hug. "I think you might be absolutely right. And if they're lonely, then they've come to exactly the right people for help." Later that night, As Sarah tucked Kiara into bed, the child had one more question. Mama Sarah, do you ever miss your old life? Before you came to live with us? Sarah considered the question seriously. It was something she had reflected on many times over the years, especially during quiet moments when she thought about the path not taken. I miss some things, she said honestly. I miss my old friends, though I still get to see many of them. I miss Earth's sunsets and the smell of rain on growing things. But, Kara, my old life was just me, alone, helping people for a few hours at a time, and then moving on. This life, our life together, is about building something that will last for generations. I get to help shape the future of entire civilizations while raising the most wonderful child in the galaxy. Do you think I'll be a good ruler someday? Kara asked quietly, voicing a concern that had begun to surface more frequently as they grew older and became more aware of their destiny. I think you'll be an extraordinary ruler, Sarah said with complete conviction. You have your mother's wisdom and strength, but you also understand compassion and empathy in ways that will help you connect with beings from many different worlds. You're going to help create a galaxy where everyone can live together peacefully. As Kiara drifted off to sleep, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 5 years ago, she had been a military doctor caught in a hopeless battle. Tonight, she was a royal consort, a mother, and a bridge between civilizations that were reshaping the galaxy. The war that had once seemed endless was now just a footnote in history books. In its place had grown an alliance that was expanding beyond anything its founders had imagined, reaching toward other galaxies and new forms of cooperation that might have been impossible without the foundation of trust and love that had been established in a medical bay during a child's darkest hour. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges and opportunities that Sarah could barely imagine. But whatever came next, she would face it with her family beside her, and the knowledge that sometimes the most profound changes in the universe could begin with a simple act of caring for someone who needed help. In the end, that was what made humanity special, not their technology or their military might, but their willingness to love without reservation, to care without asking for anything in return. And now, that gift was spreading throughout the stars, carried by the child who called her Mama, and the civilization that had learned to value compassion above conquest. The galaxy was becoming a kinder place, one patient at a time, one friendship at a time, one act of love at a time. And Sarah Martinez, former military physician turned royal consort, couldn't imagine a better legacy to leave for the generations yet to come.